Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. On the Holocaust the bombs bursting in gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium from the U.S. Department of Defense, the Chief of Staff to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, Mr. Pat M. Tamburino, Jr.
Good morning. My thanks to the member of the Marine Corps Band for their beautiful rendition and for the member of the Army who sang the national anthem. It's truly wonderful and awe-inspiring every time you get to hear that. They had to depart early. They have another engagement, but we truly appreciate you being here. I'm Pat Tamburino. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, and it's an honor for me to be here today as a career civil servant, as a Jewish American, and as the son-in-law of a Holocaust survivor. At this event, like all other Holocaust Remembrance events, I join with all of you to honor the memory of nearly 6 million innocent men, women, and children who were sent to their deaths simply because of their Jewish faith. We stand in awe of those who fought back in the ghettos and in the camps and against overwhelming odds. And in this year of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Raoul Wallenberg, we are humbled by the rescuers who refused to be bystanders to evil. Today gives me a lot of pause to think about my father-in-law, Joseph Zeller. He only spoke occasionally of what he had witnessed, what he had endured, and the atrocities he was personally subject to. The strength and courage of people like him and the panelists who are here with us today serve as a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. Sadly, it also reminds us of the depth of evil that humanity can sink to. It is something that we all have to remember. It is something that we can never forget. There are two words in the English language that, when put together instantly, of the most powerful emotions within us. The two words are Holocaust survivor. Though each of our panelists are so much more, they are living remembrances of strength. They give us the courage to continue. It provides us the perspective of the challenges that seem to us each day. In this age of many challenges, Secretary Panetta has made it clear that the Department of Defense will perform all the missions we are tasked to do. We have services deployed around the globe in harm's way. They are making great personal sacrifices as their families.
This is it's the 19th year. 19 years ago, there were 5 governmental agencies and sponsors that helped out. That's it, just 5. That number grew to 23 5 years ago, and now on this 19th annual program, we have 29. So we thank everybody for your support. When we look back to that first day 19 years ago, in 1994, the first host of this program was the Deputy Secretary of Education. It's very important and appropriate because so many people need to continue to learn about the events that we're talking about today that happened so many years ago. Make sure that those events are not forgotten or altered in history. Here's what we do know. Today's event commemorates the killing of more than 11 million people that began with Adolf Hitler and the rise of the Nazi Party in 1933. 11 million people, by the way, is the total combined population today of Washington, D.C., Virginia, West Virginia, and Delaware. All of that combined, all those lives lost. Germany's military defeat in World War I and reparations to Western allies gave rise to this man who wanted to persecute and destroy the Jewish people. As Adolf Hitler ascended in power, the German government began putting political prisoners, communists, and social democrats in concentration camps where they were tortured and eventually killed. Jews in Germany were persecuted along with gay people, the sick, and the disabled. The mentally ill and disabled sterilized by the Nazi regime. After the anti-Jewish riots on November 9th, 1938, the night of broken glass, the official Holocaust began with the killing of more than 100 Jewish citizens throughout Germany, with 30,000 Jewish people sent to concentration camps. As Germany invaded Poland, then other nations of Europe, millions of Jews, gays, disabled, mentally ill, senior citizens, prisoners of war, slave laborers, and anti-Nazi clergy, many others, all killed in concentration camps throughout Europe. In many ways, we as a global society have healed from these atrocities. In many ways, we have not. This very street, this very theater, witnessed race riots in 1968. A genocide in Rwanda in 1994 claimed more than 800,000 lives. A decade later, hundreds of thousands of lives lost in Darfur. Even today, the threat of terror attacks exists literally in all corners of the world. As tragic as these events are, however, what we cannot do is choose to turn our backs and let our own silence risk that these events will be forgotten. And with that, I'm extremely honored today to welcome our guests so that their voices and their stories can be heard and can live on, especially as Holocaust survivors continue to grow older. In fact, in Israel right now, there are less than 200,000 Holocaust survivors left. Nearly 90% of them are 75 years old or older. And the Foundation for the Benefit of Holocaust Survivors estimates that one survivor dies in Israel every hour. We'll lose one during this program. We are very fortunate, though, to have these ladies and gentlemen with us today as a witness to what happened and as a voice to so many who were never heard. I'd like them to come out now as I introduce them. I will tell you a brief history of them, and then I'll give them a chance in a few minutes to talk about themselves before we get into the actual program. Our first guest today is Stefania Sitbon. Stefania, a Jewish woman who as a baby was smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto and was hidden in the Warsaw Zoo by zoo director Jan Zabinski and his wife Antonina. Stefania and her brother are the two remaining survivors of the more than 300 people who were hidden within the zoo. The Warsaw Zoo Rescue was featured in the 2007 best-selling book, The Zookeeper's Wife. Paramount Pictures also is in the process of filming a story on the Warsaw Zoo, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a welcome to Stefania Sitbon. Our second guest today is Ernst Flauter. Ernst was born in Stettin, Germany, which is currently located in Poland. In 1925, now Ernst went to school in Stettin before Hitler took power, and he witnessed firsthand the changes that took place in Germany under the Nazi regime. Mr. Flauter was forced to join the Hitler Youth Corps, as were all German students at the time. He witnessed the night of broken glass in his city. He saw his Jewish neighbors who lived above his apartment flee to Berlin. They were later exterminated at a concentration camp. Their son, the only survivor, later lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here to join us today and share his story with you all, please welcome Ernst Flauter. Ernst. And our third guest this morning is Gerald Schwab. Gerald lives locally now. One of your neighbors, perhaps. He lives in Alexandria, Virginia. He was raised in Germany, though. He fled to the United States when he was drafted. He was drafted once he fled here. He fought in Italy with the army. He was then sent to Nuremberg as a translator with the witnesses for the Nuremberg trials. He helped to screen what would be presented and what details would be given. He managed to view personally a few days of the trials themselves and is one of the last people still alive with a personal connection to the Nuremberg trials. Please welcome Gerald Schwab. Gerald. Well, you've gotten a brief introduction of our guests today. Now, I'd like to give them the opportunity to talk just for a few minutes about themselves and fill in a few of the details. And Stefania, if you would be so kind first. Please, you can stay seated if you like. But just give us a very brief synopsis of your life in your own words.
My name is Stefania Sidbon Kenigswein. I'm a Jewish woman born on February 12, 1939. In Warsaw, Poland. I'm the second oldest as a family of 5. My extended family was extremely large. My father got 12 siblings, my mom 7 siblings. All of them died at the war. We were sent after the Germans invaded Poland. We were sent to Ghetto Warsaw.
We're going to talk much more with Stefania in just a few minutes. Mr. Flauder, I'd like to give you a chance to give a brief history of your life, if you'd be so kind.
I'm Ernst Floder. I'm here to represent the German people who survived the Holocaust and those who were powerless to save the innocent murdered. I was raised in the very early 30s to children by parents who did not believe in the Nazi philosophy and made it clear to the children that this new regime was evil, had an evil core. So it became obvious that we were ruled by a dictatorial government controlled by the police, Gestapo, SS, and the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, and all the followers of Adolf Hitler.
And Mr. Schwab, if you'd be so kind.
There's an opening. The Chinese have a saying when they want to give somebody a hard time, may you live in interesting times. I think all of us did. I was born in Germany, lived there till 1933 on the edge of the Black Forest. Then my parents had a business which encompassed parts of Switzerland, France, and Germany. We moved to France, came back, lived in Germany from 1935, and my father conducted his business. From there, in 1938, the Kristallnacht, Nights of Broken Glass, happened after the assassination of a German third secretary of the embassy in Paris. And at that point, anti-Semitism became much more pronounced, and it was the culmination of things that had started in 1932 with Hitler's initial election. My father was suddenly prevented from exercising his livelihood. I was kicked out of a German school on November 8th, 1938. By the way, that was no great tragedy as far as I was concerned, since I was about to flunk Latin. I was moved, thanks to some Swiss authorities, to Switzerland, where I lived for a while with a farmer, a peasant farmer, in a village of 300 people. That's why I found out that I would not ever make a good farmer. In 1940, May 10th, 1940, I went back to Germany to get a visa to the United States. The Germans having concluded that they had gotten every bit of foreign currency that my father had ever had. And about a week later, we were on the high seas on the SS Washington. We lived for a while in New York. Then my parents worked with a family in Long Branch, New Jersey. And subsequently, they became farmers. They took over a poultry farm. I got into the army. This was 1940. 1944, I was back in the Army. I was in the Army. Later on that year, I was in Italy, joined the 10th Mountain Division. We fought in northern Italy. At the end of the war, we were on Lake Garda. And subsequently, I stayed there with an intelligence outfit, and then subsequently went to Nuremberg as a translator and interpreter, which was a very interesting experience. And if anybody wants to know how come a 19-year-old kid can be a translator or interpreter at an international tribunal, the answer is very simple. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king. I happen to be able to speak a reasonable amount of English and German. After that, I got back to the States in 1947, went to college. Straight from college, came to Washington and joined the Foreign Service, and I dragged my family all over the world.
And back here now
And
in
back here
Alexandria,
now.
Virginia. We're so honored to have all three of you. What I'd like for you to do right now, if you would, is to have the three of you rise. And while you do so, we're going to listen to Sarita Davis perform for us. I'd like the three of you to rise, join together as you light this candle in unity. And of course, the reason for that is to honor those lives lost during the Holocaust.
I believe in the sun, even when it is not shining. And I believe in love, even when there's no one there. And I believe in God, even when He is silent. I believe for every trial there is always a way. But sometimes in this suffering and hopeless despair, my heart cries for shelter, to know someone's there. But a voice rises within me, saying, hold on, my child, I'll give you strength
loneliness. May there someday be love. May there someday be peace.
What I would like to do right now, and for your enjoyment as well, and educational purposes, before we get a chance to sit down and really learn a little bit more about each of these people, we're going to do a little show and tell. What we're going to do is show you a little bit of a documentary so that you can gain a little more knowledge into some of the events that we've been talking about and will continue to talk about. We mentioned earlier, Paramount Pictures is in the process of filming the story of the Warsaw Zoo, focusing on the zoo director and his wife, and how they were able to save some 300 Jewish men, women, and children, including Stefania and her brother, who were just youngsters at the time. Now, that film won't be ready for distribution until 2013. You'll be able to see it sometime next year, and we sure hope that you do. But the Warsaw Zoo story has been captivating filmmakers for a long time, gaining popularity with them. So what we'd like to do right now, before we talk with Stefania, we'd like to share a short clip right now from one of those films, a documentary that is entitled Safe Haven.
The Königswein family spent their first night in an underground corridor leading to the old lion's cage.
October or November of 1942, it was raining all the time. So the Zabinskis brought me and my sister Stefcha to the basement of their villa. They gave my mother and father pieces of fur that allowed them to stay in the animal cages.
Richard Zabinski remembers how his mother tried to make the Königswein family look more Aryan. She would attempt to change dark hair to blonde using hydrogen peroxide. Since the final results depended on the strength of the solution, the outcome was never predictable. They all looked like squirrels, said Richard. Richard understood that a slip of the tongue could mean the death penalty for everyone in the house. Moshe, a few years younger, also understood the perils they faced.
We never went outside. We knew very well that what it meant to be underground, and we realized we had to be quiet because of the danger. I understood it very well by then. We would just be in the basement the whole time. We sat there quietly, and we didn't make any noise, didn't cry, nothing. We didn't play, but passed the time sleeping. It was all very serious.
The Germans had closed down all universities, high schools, and most primary schools. So Richard busied himself with his chores, which included picking greens for the rabbits and chickens. Many years later, Masha Königswein remembers the words of his mother, Regina.
She said, the Zabinskis' home was Noah's Ark, with so many animals and people hidden there.
Of the 20,000 who fled the ghetto, more than 11,000 survived. Against all odds of surviving, all but 2 of the 300 people seeking safe haven at the Warsaw Zoo survived the war. It is estimated their survival required the efforts of 70,000 people. Ordinary Poles, risking their lives to provide a network of safe havens for their neighbors in peril. Zookeeper Jan Sabinski, along with his wife Antonina and young son Richard, are counted among these 70,000 extraordinary people.
Stefania's with us, and the first thing that you said when you were watching that was, "There's your brother," and then you saw your mom. Tell us a little bit about what you thought while you were watching that.
I miss my mom.
You miss your mom?
Yeah. My brother, that is older than me 2 years, he was born in 37, and I, like I said, in 39, in a very nice year. And he lives in Israel, and he served 30 years in the army. He's now retired from army. And Steve Spielberg came to Israel to look for kids of Holocaust, and he found my brother. What can I say? There were very bad times. We were kids. We were hiding like mouse in basements. And when the uprising in ghetto have to start, we have to leave the ghetto. My father was with the fighters, and they said that we have to leave because the German will destroy the ghetto. And we didn't really know where to go. There were two Polish guys that helped us very much. One by name Zygmunt Piętak, and one officer of the underground Polish army by name Felix Cywiński, that says that they will, for good money, have homes that will save us. Then my father didn't have choice. He paid a lot of money to put us in these homes. But after a while, they said, "Sorry, you have to leave. The money is finished." Then my mom didn't know what to do. And she remembered that her father used to sell vegetables and fruits, and what was left at the end of the day, he used to send to the zoo. And my mom used to come with him because her Polish was better than his. And she thought that maybe she could go there and we will save there. In the morning, my mom went there, knocked at the door, and said that we don't have where to go and where to hide. The wife of the director of zoo was very happy that we survived, and they took us in. We were there hiding in the animals' cages, and the family used to ask at the kitchen more food. The employees there didn't know that we are there, and they start to talk what happened to them. there is no food and they eat more and more because they didn't know that we were hiding there and they are feeding us. And they start to talk, and like every second day, the Gestapo and SS used to come and check if there is nobody there. And there was a time that the employees start to talk. Something happens here, and they were very afraid that somebody will say something to the Germans. And they said to my mom, I'm sorry, but you have to leave. And then again, we have to look for a place to hide. Then came again Zygmunt and Piętak and Felix Siwiński and said, for good money, we will again find you a place. And this continued like that. My father paid and we were saved. But before we left the ghetto, I forgot to tell that at 42 October was born my youngest brother in the ghetto. He got 2 months when we have to leave the ghetto. My mom didn't know what to do with the baby. And Zygmunt said to her, look, I have a friend in the daycare of the nuns in Warsaw. I will say that I found them, I found the baby, and I will put them there. And again, my father put a lot of money on him and write the name. And he took him and said that he found them on the street and he doesn't know what to do, and the nuns took him in. This is 42. And then when we have to leave the zoo, my brother was sent to a convent. There, he learned how to pray. They teach him not to take off the pants when somebody is close and not pee in public, because otherwise everybody will know that he's a Jew. And he learned because he didn't have choice. I was sent to a family out of Warsaw, my mom also. And again, after the money finished, we have to go again to another family, in another family. And this is the way how we survived. Because the money. If we wouldn't have money, I think we wouldn't survive. This small history.
You can imagine how difficult it is for some people to talk about this. And for Stefania, we're glad she's here. And this is actually the first time that she's gone into detail speaking in English. So we certainly appreciate you doing that, and you're doing a fantastic job. But when we talk about that and the difficulties of sharing the story, or the desire to share this story, it was a long time, even after you found safety, that you were willing to talk about this with anybody, wasn't it?
No, we didn't talk about it. After a long time, in 1957, we emigrated from Poland, but before. At 45 was born my sister. And then we were already 4. My father tried to build a new life for us. And at 48 was born my brother, and we are 5. But after 3 months that my brother was born, my father passed away of heart attack at age 40. And my mom left alone with 5 small children. My brother was 10, I was 8, my other brother was 5, my sister was 3, and my youngest brother was 3 months. And she tried to survive. In 1957, when President Gomulka said, who wants to leave Poland, this means Jews, can leave Poland to Palestine. My mom was the first in the line, because then my brother was almost 20. If we wouldn't leave, he would go to the army. And my mom said, if we go to the army, he will go in Israel to the army. And this is what we did. In 1957, we emigrated to Israel. And after 6 months, my brother was mobilized to the army, and he served like 30 years in the army. And we grew up. We didn't have choice. My mom worked hard to give us education, and everybody tried to survive.
As you were trying to survive, at what point did you feel comfortable talking either with your family or those outside your family about what it was that you had gone through?
Long time we didn't talk about it. But when Yad Vashem tried to, how you say, the people that help Jewish, how you call them? The right, yes. And my mom right away went to Yad Vashem and said that Zygmunt Piętak, because Felix Cywiński didn't live, he died. Zygmunt Cywiński is the right, yes, and he got a pension from Yad Vashem, he got a tree in Yad Vashem, and he started to visit us. And he started to talk to us and said, Stefcha, you have to talk about it. And I said, look, I was a small kid. I was 7 months when the war started. I cannot talk about something that I really don't remember. And he sat with us and tell us the whole story. And he said, you have to talk about it because you survived a very bad time. And this was the first time that I was talking with like 1,000 people in Israel about what happened to us. But in Hebrew was very light. Here is harder for me. And then I belonged to a women organization, volunteer organization in Israel that help people and abused women, and they asked for somebody, one time they asked for somebody if we know somebody that survived the war. And I say, you know what, I am a survivor. And then I start to talk. And what I remember about my mom, that 2 weeks before, in 2 weeks after a remembered stage of the Shoah, she was out. She was like not normal. We couldn't talk to her. We couldn't, she was so nervous. She was crying. And I asked her, Mom, what happens? And she said, what happens? All my family, in your father's family, that was very, very large. There was like 100 people. My father got 12 siblings, all of them married with kids. My grandparents from my father's side, the same from my mom's side, all they gone. How can I be normal? how can I live a normal life? And we said we don't have choice. We have to continue because this is the life. Who survive have to continue. And we all married, we have kids, we have grandchildren, and we are very happy to have them.
It's such a great testament to the will to survive. Stefania, we thank you so much. We're going to talk with Stefania again in just a few minutes. And I also encourage you to, if you get a chance to watch the film that we showed you that clip from before, it's called Safe Haven. And it's just a great picture. And now that you've had a chance to hear from Stefania, you're going to get a lot more out of it. Also, keep an eye out for the film that Paramount is going to be putting out next year. Ernst, I want to talk with you for a minute. The beauty of having these three people together is that while they are all considered survivors of what happened, they all have very different accounts and very different experiences and very different lives, both before, during, and after the war. Ernst, you actually grew up in Germany.
I grew up in Germany, in Stettin. It's a city north of Berlin. And we didn't have too many Jewish stores in our town, like Berlin. So, 1933, I went to school, and two of my school buddies were Jewish, and so far as I know, they made it safely to Palestine. In the same year, the Hitler salute was made obligatory in schools and in the families, and as soon as Hitler was in power, the anti-Jewish propaganda started up, like in resort towns. There were signs, Jews are not wanted here, and in parks, on benches, there were signs only for Gentiles. So the obvious sign was that he was there to destroy the Jewish population. And in 1935, when the Nuremberg laws were established, which deprived the Jewish population of all their rights, like marriage and household, and they made them taking the third citizen. And then I had to join 1935 when you became 10 years old. You had to join the forerunners of the Hitler Youth, the young folk, the young people. So we had to report to duty Wednesday and Saturday, every day, or every week. And mostly on Wednesday we went to a schoolyard. They were chased around. The motto of the Hitler Youth was, the young people have to be led by young people. It's not like the Boy Scouts here in the States. So our superiors, they were really sometimes really like like drill sergeants, so to speak. But on Saturday we went mostly out in the woods and played something. So I didn't like it too much until it was 1935 and 36. Nothing happened in 1936. So there was Olympic Games in Berlin, and during the Olympic Games, all the Jewish anti-propaganda was abolished, at least in Berlin, because there were so many visitors from foreign countries. So Hitler the Nazis didn't want to put any bad pictures in the open. And then we had above us lived a pediatrician, a Dr. Weigert, and they went to Berlin, hopefully to go underground among the million people, but they ended up in the concentration camp Theresienstadt. Their son survived somehow, and he became a metallurgist in Pittsburgh, with whom I corresponded after I came to this country. In 1938, there was an election. There was not a real election, but only like a plebiscite. Are you for the annexation of Austria or not? And one time my father didn't appear in time. Two SS men came to him and took him to the polls. So he made sure there was 99.9% participation. And then in November, he had mentioned that the German ambassador was assassinated, and so the Nazis took this as a reason to go out and burn all the synagogues in Germany and looted all the German stores and started the Holocaust. I know that until then I didn't know much about what was going on, what I just heard from my parents, because everybody had to be afraid what they tell the children. But that night, and early in the morning, our building manager, rang the bell, and he told us the synagogue is burning. So the synagogue was not too far away from us, so we dressed up and went down there, and the synagogue was all in flame, and SS all over the town, and my father made the voice saying, I bet in a few years everything will be destroyed around here, because there were signs of an upcoming war. So it was true, 1944, there was nothing left in that area. And that was, I went to school that morning, and we had two Jewish shoe stores. They were all busted up, SS all over town, and that was like a revelation for me. And so it was really bad. The really bad stuff started against the Jews. And then in 1940 or 1939, when the war broke out, my father convinced me that Germany would not win the war. So I made a wish to become prisoner in America, and that came true. And then, have you heard it through the grapevine that on the 24th of February 1940, 1,300 Jews from my area were deported through the night to Poland, to a little town of Plowno, and either they died there on starvation or later on in death camps. And before, in the 30s, we had quite a few gypsies living in my town. They disappeared overnight too. Everything happened at 2 o'clock in the morning. Then the Gestapo came, or the police came, and chased the people out, and nobody knew about it, what was going on, because it was all so hush-hush. But that was about, and then they made my area free of Jews, because there were no Jews anymore left. Either they were all dead or in concentration camps.
One of the things that I think that we lose sight of these days, especially the young people today, all of us who have grown up with freedom, it really hits home when you talk about things like not having the basic rights that we have here, like the right to vote, being forced to go to the polls, being forced to make that vote. Your story is interesting in that you grew up in Germany, you loved your homeland, you were friends with the Jewish people growing up, and then all of a sudden everything changed. What was that like for you as you saw all these changes happening around you?
Well, it's hard to say. We know that the Jews, we thought the Jews were deported, and they were in working camps, and kept in working camps. We had no idea about any other concentration camp except Buchenwald, Dachau, and Sachsenhausen or Oranienburg. These were known because they were established more than political 1933. But about other concentration camps in Buchenwald, Belt, or even Auschwitz, if you know about it, you kept your mouth shut. And there is a story, somebody wrote a book, The Deputy, and high SS officer went to Auschwitz, but then he got completely disgusted with the whole business there. He went out and tried to convince the Western world what was going on. And nobody believed him. He said, Germany, with Bach and Beethoven and Schiller and Goethe, you're an idiot, that's impossible. Nobody believed what was going on in Germany until even I think even the State Department didn't know much about it, what was going on, because that was so hush up against all the Holocaust, the movement, until they were then 1945 or 44 already, when the Russian liberated Auschwitz and the American liberated Buchenwald and Belsen and everything, all the 100s of many, many other concentration camps.
The war was going on, you were fighting while this happened. You had actually already been a prisoner of war by the time that these camps were liberated. When you learned the true extent as to what was happening in your homeland at the time, what did you think then when you realized how tragic the events had become?
Everybody when was over here as a prisoner of war. We had to go to, they showed us a movie about the atrocities. And so it was quite shocking for us to see what our beloved Führer did. And nobody knew how sick he was and how evil the whole system was. So we had in our camp, I was down there in New Mexico, we had about 10, we called them super Nazis, they're incurable, and they believed in a victory until the last minute. So we were anti-Nazis, we were about 12 anti-Nazis, and so we were lucky to get to 1946 to a camp in Fort Eustis in Virginia for a school for democracy, and then we were discharged immediately into Germany.
And you came back here and you've been living in the States since 1957.
57, and we were happy. We never regretted it 1 second that we over here. We were sponsored by a church in East Lansing, and we were my wife. My daughter was 4 months old. She's among here.
Stuart Schulberg, a young Marine Corps officer, and his older brother, my uncle Bud Schulberg, was charged with obtaining and assembling for the Nuremberg courtroom Nazi films that Justice Jackson, the chief U.S. prosecutor at the trial, could enter as a form of legal evidence, which was the first time that motion pictures had really been used in a significant way as a form of evidence in the courtroom. They put together 2 major films for the courtroom, a 4-hour film called The Nazi Plan, and a 1-hour compilation film that had been shot mainly by American and British liberators when they entered some of the camps, that they called simply Nazi concentration camps. These were put together, these were assembled in the Nuremberg Palace of Justice as the trial was being prepared and shown in the courtroom on a large movie screen that was specially created for the courtroom. A year later, when the trial was finally completed, the War Department brought my father back to make the official documentary about the first Nuremberg trial. And today, you're going to see 2 excerpts from that film. Ironically, after it was completed, the US government decided it was not appropriate for Americans to see. And we now know that it was our Secretary of the Army at the time, Kenneth Royal, who decided, as he wrote in a letter to Justice Jackson, that, quote, "Our policies have changed, and in my opinion, it is not in the interest of the Army or our nation as a whole to see this film, and we will therefore not be releasing it to the general public." During the intervening years that the film had been shelved, the negative and the underlying soundtracks were lost, and through a 5-year restoration effort, with the support of several federal agencies, I'm very pleased to acknowledge the National Archives and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and also the intellectual support of Eli Rosenberg-Brum, who's here from the Department of Justice. My team was able to create a new negative and reconstruct the soundtrack. So today you will see Jackson's opening statement to the tribunal, and then we'll flash forward through the miracle of video editing to the verdicts. So you will see the opening of the film and the closing of the film. Thank you.
It was 1945. The war was over. Slowly, painfully, life came back to the ruins of Europe. The war was over, but there was no peace. Despair crouched over the continent. Hopelessness circled Europe like a bird of prey. Why? What were the forces? What were the issues in a war that turned nations into rubble heaps and populations into beggars? The people wanted the answers. They wanted to know what happened and why. In the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, the people of the world came together, for there sat the International Military Tribunal to judge the chief Nazi war criminals. Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Wilhelm Keitel, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Wilhelm Frick, Julius Streicher, Walter Funk, Hjalmar Schacht, Karl Dönitz, Erich Raeder, Baldur von Schirach, Fritz Saukel, Alfred Jodl, Martin Bormann, Franz von Papen, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, Albert Speer, Konstantin von Neurath, Hans Fritzsche. As individuals and as members of the political leadership of the German Reich and National Socialist Workers' Party, including the intelligence service, Gestapo, stormtroopers, general staff and high command of the German Wehrmacht. Justice Robert H. Jackson, the chief American prosecutor, makes the opening statement for the prosecution.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. This inquest represents the practical effort of four of the most mighty of nations, with the support of 15 more, to utilize international law to meet the greatest menace of our times, aggressive war. The common sense of mankind demands that law shall not stop with the punishment of petty crimes by little people. It must also reach men who possess themselves of great power and make deliberate and concerted use of it to set in motion evils which leave no home in the world untouched. In the prisoner's dock sit 20-odd broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. Merely as individuals, their fate is of little consequence to the world. What makes this inquest significant is that these prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust. They are the living symbols of the arrogance and cruelty of power, of racial hatreds, terrorism, and of violence. symbols of fierce nationalisms and militarism, of intrigue and war-making which have embroiled Europe generation after generation, crushing its manhood, destroying its homes, and impoverishing its life. They have so identified themselves with the philosophies they conceived and with the forces they have directed that any tenderness to them is a victory and an encouragement to all the evils which are attached to their names. What these men stand for, we will patiently and temperately disclose. We will give you undeniable proofs of incredible events. The catalogue of crimes will omit nothing. It may be that these men of troubled conscience do not regard a trial as a favor, but they do have a fair opportunity to defend themselves, a favor which, when in power, they rarely extended even to their fellow countrymen. We will not ask you to convict these men on the testimony of their foes. There is no count in the indictment that cannot be proved by books and records. We will show you their own films. You will see their own conduct and hear their own voices as these defendants reenact for you some of the events in the course of the conspiracy. Their acts, as we shall recount them before you, have bathed the world in blood and set civilization back a century. They have subjected their European neighbors to every spoliation and deprivation. They have brought the German people to the lowest pitch of wretchedness. They have stirred hatred and incited domestic violence on every continent. These are the things that stand in the dock shoulder to shoulder with these prisoners. The real complaining party at your bar is civilization.
On October 1st, 1946, the verdict is delivered by Lord Justice Lawrence, President of the Tribunal. Of the organizations, the SS, SD, Gestapo, and Leadership Corps are found guilty. The High Command, SA, and Reich Cabinet, not guilty. As for the individuals, Hermann Göring, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Rudolf Hess, guilty of conspiracy and crimes against peace, life imprisonment. Joachim von Ribbentrop, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Wilhelm Keitel, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Alfred Rosenberg, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Hans Frank, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Wilhelm Frick, guilty of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Julius Streicher, guilty of crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Walter Funk, guilty of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Life imprisonment. Hjalmar Schacht, not guilty on this indictment, released. Karl Dönitz, guilty of crimes against peace and war crimes, 10 years imprisonment. Eric Rader, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, and war crimes, life imprisonment. Bolder von Schirach, guilty of crimes against humanity, 20 years imprisonment. Fritz Saukel, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Alfred Jodl, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Franz von Papen, not guilty on this indictment, released. Albert Speer, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, 20 years imprisonment. Konstantin von Neurath, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, 15 years imprisonment. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Hans Fritzsche, not guilty on this indictment, released. Martin Bormann, tried in absentia, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. The trial is over. Seven begin their prison sentences. Goering chooses to die by his own hand. The other 10 wait for the gallows. In Nuremberg, the people of the world found out what happened and why. But Nuremberg is more than an answer to a question. As Justice Jackson said, this trial is part of the great effort to make the peace more secure. It constitutes juridical action of a kind to ensure that those who start a war will pay for it personally. Nuremberg stands as a warning to all those who plan and wage aggressive war.
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, survivor, I'm listed as a survivor at the Holocaust Museum. I've been working there on and off since, about 15, 18 years. To my mind, survivors should describe those people who ended up in concentration camps and survived, or they, like our fellow speaker here, people who hid out, those are the real survivor. The rest of us, well, life wasn't exactly great, but we overcame it. And I think we should really consider the prisoners, the people who were in concentration camps, who did survive, that they are designated as such.
Gerald is being very diplomatic and very humble. It works, you know it, doesn't it?
Wasn't me.
He's being very diplomatic and very humble about it, but Gerald did lose loved ones and members of loved ones' families, and that is not to be taken lightly. One thing that we had talked about earlier, though, that you had brought up, is in how we remember this and what we've seen throughout the day today. We've been fortunate to have the firsthand accounts, but normally we don't get that. We live in a world of numbers, in a world of statistics, and we hear of how many lives were lost. We don't often hear the personal stories, and we don't often have a way to personalize the atrocities of what happened. What to you stands out as a personal memory that you think about when you remember everything that you lived through?
Well, in my own family, obviously, my father was in a concentration camp, was released after a while of having been a fighter for the Reich in World War I. My wife, who is here, was evacuated from Germany in 1939 to England, said goodbye to her parents in early 1939, and never saw them again. The thing that bothers me is we talk about I'm not even going to name a number, X million people, Jews, Roma, Sinti, Poles, religious leaders, all sorts of people who were prisoners and who died. They're all lumped into this general figure of X number of X million. And the thing that comes to my mind is a little story where if you look in the books on the Holocaust, even the big ones, may have a limited description of this particular case, a paragraph, maybe even less. In 1943, there was talk between representatives of some organizations who talked both to the Germans and to the Allies, and were talking about the possibility of exchanging children for trucks. I might say this thing never actually took place. But at the Theresienstadt concentration camp, there arrived a group of 240, I believe, children from Poland, Polish kids, in an absolutely terrible state. They had seen their parents killed. They had seen untold mayhem. They didn't smile, they didn't sing. These were kids from age 4 to about 14. And They were accompanied by a leader and a number of children's nurses who did everything possible to make these kids become kids again. They wouldn't sleep at night. They feared, they screamed that they're being killed, etc. Well, they were in this concentration camp in Theresienstadt, or Terezin, outside of Prague, away from the general population. I might mention that Theresienstadt was not an extermination camp. In fact, it was a camp which was a camp that was established to fool foreign observers. They were able to do all sorts of, they had playgrounds, etc. And after a few months, these kids became children again. They started singing, they started playing games. Regrettably, I guess it's regrettably, the deal fell through. And one day, the kids, dressed in their Sunday best, they all had gotten new clothing, new shoes, and they formed them into a column. They sang and they marched off. They marched to the railroad station. They got onto a train. And not a single one of these children or their leaders, their caretakers, survived. To me, that represents individuals. That represents the evil of the Holocaust. May I make one other remark? I was absolutely delighted to see this film. It is the first time that any program I've seen or heard dealt with the Nazi organizations that were also on trial and for whom that particular hearing I interpreted and met many of the individuals. So it was a delight. I've never seen it before. I knew it happened because I was there.
I think the true delight for all of us is having you here so that you can share your stories with us. You're worried sometimes that we won't be able to put that face on the atrocities of what happened. Well, by the three of you being here, you're able to provide these personal accounts to all of us, and hopefully to many more for years to come, so that this history can live on as it happened and as it should be told. As we wrap things up now, I want to make sure that we do recognize a couple of very special people who are with us. Gerald wasn't the only one here who was part of the Nuremberg trials or had an affiliation with it. There are a couple of young ladies here in the audience that we want to introduce to you right now that are very special guests of us today. Two people who have been sitting with you throughout this entire program, and we want to recognize them. Two people who knew each other years ago, drifted apart for many years to be reunited once again today. So I would like you to stand if it's not too much trouble for you ladies. First of all, Gwendolyn Herren-Niebergall. Please stand. Joining Gwendolyn is Barbara Buttery Bitter. Barbara, if you would stand as well. Now, these two young ladies worked for the United States of America during the Nuremberg trials. And until now, they had not seen each other for 60 years. Until now. A little bit of background. Gwendolyn supervised a team of typists who produced transcripts of the trial for the judges and counsel. This long before the days of computers, and she reminds us long before the days of electric typewriters. No, they had to do it all by hand, and the paperwork that was strewn all over the place. For Gwen, the war was personal, as her office in London had been bombed. Barbara, however, suffered a greater loss perhaps. Her brother and her husband both were lost to the war. As a document analyst at Nuremberg, she became one of the first people outside of the Nazi regime to examine the documents that eventually outlined the extent of the atrocities of the war. Many of her documents are still right here in Washington, D.C., and can be found at the National Archives. Please join me again in recognizing these two very special ladies who have some serious catching up to do. We're so honored to have everybody with us. As we wrap things up before we go home, I wanted to thank you personally all for being here today and sharing your stories. What I'd like to ask is just a final thought, if you have one, either to where we've come in these last 60-some years, or where you hope this story goes from here. And if you don't mind, Stefania, I'll start with you.
A lot of the Holocaust survivors are not with us anymore. And I think my brothers and I are the last generation of survivors of the war. What we would like to do is to talk, to tell the stories that the young generation knows and remember what happened, and we wish that never happens again.
It's very well put, and we appreciate you being with us today, Stefania. Ernst, a final thought from you?
Well, I hope it will never happen again. And I'm happy that there are survivors at all, that not everybody was vanished in the camps. And this story should be told over and over again, and never forgotten. Maybe you can forgive, but never forget.
Gerald, you get the final word this afternoon.
I hate to say so, but when I first arrived in Nuremberg, I was utterly delighted. If I stood on an orange crate, I could look over much of the city. I feel differently now. But I think the main thing is I've changed quite a bit. We've got to remember this, and as he said, we can forgive, but we can never or should never forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you learned something that you can take forth from this day and share these stories that these folks were so willing to come here and join us with. I want to personally thank all of you, and I hope you'll all rise with me and give a proper thanks to these folks for joining us today.